Okay, here's a question in reference to the cups of wine at the Seder meal. From the small amount of research I did, it appears the four cups represent four means of deliverance God promised his people. Did they symbolically view the wine as the blood of the sacrificial lamb? It seems strange that they would even drink symbolic blood, as that is a strong prohibition for the Jewish people. And if they didn't view it this way, wouldn't it have been extremely distasteful, not just strange, for Jesus to tell them that the wine was his blood and ask them to think of that when they drank it? Also, this goes for eating the quote body. I realize that blood as a covenant sign is normal, but not as something to ingest. Second question. In the context of the Passover meal, when Jesus said, as often as you do this, it seems like he is referring to as often as you eat this unleavened bread at Passover, since that is when he was reading the Seder script and inserting some changes. I know in Acts, some interpret the believers breaking bread daily as celebrating communion daily, and that over time, Passover shifted into Easter for some. But how should we take communion? Once a week? Once a year? Why not every time we eat? All right, so two questions there. We'll break them into their two parts. The first has to do with the question of whether the wine at the Passover meal symbolized blood. And the answer is absolutely not. Wine in the Jewish mind symbolized the beautiful life. It was life-giving. It was the fruit of the vine. It was the blessing of God. So when we read in the Bible of God blessing his people, it's always associated with this, with the wine that comes from vineyards that are growing. It's a sign of prosperity. You don't need wine to live. It's a sign of abundance. It's a sign that things are going well. You've gotten past just surviving and now you're thriving. That's always what wine represents in the New Testament. Or sorry, in the Old Testament. Jesus infuses this with new meaning. And the question, would this have been offensive? Absolutely, it would have been offensive. In fact, we know it was offensive because in John chapter 6, remember, Jesus is speaking to the crowds. And he said this, he says, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in him. Now, he's looking forward to this event. He's looking forward to his death on the cross, his burial, his resurrection, and even perhaps to the communion remembrance. And it says in verse 60, when many of his disciples heard it, they said, this is a hard saying. Who can listen to it? Of course it was offensive. It's very distasteful to think of this. But think, what does it symbolize? What it symbolizes is that somebody's body had to die in order for that blood to be shed. And that what does the blood represent? The life of the flesh is in the blood. So if you want to live, you've got to take into your body the life of someone else. And so when you eat the bread, you drink the cup, that's what it represents. That's exactly what Jesus meant. And he intended it to be distasteful. Why? Because it is distasteful. Somebody has to die for us. And so it's an accurate representation of what has transpired spiritually in God saving his people. Second question, how often should we take it? I do think probably the best way to read the text is that as often as you partake in the Passover meal, then do this in remembrance of me. I think it's probably the most natural way to read it. But all through church history and all through our Christian traditions, we take it more frequently than that, and there's nothing wrong with it. Of course, we're just trying to remember that God has done these things for us, and so it's a gift from God to take it in whatever context the elders of the church decide. And again, I do think this is something that ought to be done in the context of the church. That's one of the responsibilities of the elders is to administer the Lord's Supper. So that feels appropriate. Some churches will disagree on that, and that's a minor issue, but I think that's the way we do it here at Cypress Bible Church.